Talk Radio 77. WABC. It's the left versus the right. In the right corner, it's James Flippin. In the left corner, it's Anthony Weiner. Live from Studio 77, it's a 77 WABC debate.
So welcome to Left versus Right. I'm Anthony Weiner on your left, James Flippin on your right. This is our last episode for the year. Yeah. You're clearly getting settled in. This, I think, your 10th or something. It's been really great to have you across the microphone from me. We've got a lot to chew on this week. And at the end, we're going to do something special. We're going to pick our person or persons of the year, because we don't care about Time Magazine. Nobody reads Time Magazine, but everyone listens to Left versus Right. But let's start with the first issue. Joe Biden, outgoing president, tiptoeing his way to the door, made some news, as he did with his son Hunter, and commutes the sentence of everyone on federal death row, I think, except for one or two that were engaged in terrorism or in civil rights violations, hate crimes. What do you think about him? Now, just to be clear, some people have said on our airwaves they were pardons, they were not, just made them all life in prison without a chance for parole. What do you think about that?
Well, I mean, I'll be honest with you, Anthony. I'm not a huge fan of the death penalty, whether it's just me looking at it as the government screws up sometimes. They've certainly imprisoned falsely innocent people or people who were not guilty. And then you look at the Innocence Project, you know that there have been people put to death who most likely were improperly convicted. So just sort of on moral grounds, I'm not really that into the death penalty, but I did find it very, very interesting, the three cases that did not have the sentences commuted.
I didn't even see these, so tell me about these.
So you alluded to it. One of them is the Tsarnaev, the kid from the Boston Marathon bombing.
Right.
And that's a widespread, very high-profile terrorism case.
Right.
So maybe Biden sort of felt a certain type of way about potentially commuting that sentence. The other two are Dylan Roof, the guy who shot up the historically black church in South Carolina. And then I can't remember the name of the third guy, but he's the one who shot up the synagogue, the Tree of Life synagogue, in 2018. So without going too far into those threse cases, let's just say I find it very interesting that it's almost like the orthodoxy of the left shall not be violated when it comes to these were racist murders, that these were anti-Semitic murders. In other words, the other cases were just as horrifying in the sense that people were killed, it's murder, it's the unlawful taking of life. But those cases, it's almost like the politics of it played in a little bit for Biden.
You know, this was bound to happen on our last broadcast of the year, but I think you have it right. I think you're right that I've come around on the death penalty. When I first got into public life in the early 1990s, I, like a lot of people, and if you look at the polling, I was where a lot of people were. Crime was out of control, and the death penalty seemed like it made sense. But as we've now learned more about all kinds of reasons why sometimes mistakes get made, prosecutorial misconduct, everything to DNA evidence revealing that someone wasn't even at the scene of the crime, I have now come to believe that the death penalty is a bad idea because, you know what, if you make a mistake, you can't undo it. I also agree with you. I mean, if you believe that that's the case, it should be the case for any crime. You either have a consistent position on the death penalty or you don't. That's the challenge that I think. Now, I totally get it. I mean, first of all, even if it's not a famous case, if you were the victim of one of these people that's on death row, you're pretty upset, or you might be pretty upset that is other people that happen to have their cases made into the newspaper or particularly horrific because of how many people were impacted. Look, one of the things I think about some of these issues is I think that voters are prepared to give you some leeway, whether it be choice or death penalty, things that, you know, you have beliefs. If you stand up and articulate your belief about it, Mario Cuomo, in the height of all of the tumult about the death penalty, when it was at 70% popularity, fell on his sword and arguably lost his final re-election because he refused to budge on it. But he made a moral argument about it, would even go to churches and make those moral arguments. So I agree with you. Either pick a lane. Either you believe the death penalty is not, that the federal government, or the state government for that matter, should not be in the business of killing people, then that's got to be true for that. And I'll tell you something else. It's no great favor sometimes to say to these criminals, you've got to stay in a prison cell and watch as you rot in heck. And so I think that a lot of people probably would have said, if now I will say this, that a lot of people who did not make a peep about a long line of pardons that Donald Trump did for his buddies, for financial criminals, for everyone under the sun who apparently got in the front door, to now make a big deal about this because how outrageous it is to pardon killers. Here's what I would say. If you're getting a pardon, that means you did something wrong. And I believe the president should use his pardon power to show mercy and to remind us all every once in a while that there are values at stake. But I'll give you the last word on this.
So you would probably agree then, if there's any preemptive pardons issued concerning January 6th, that something was wrong in that whole investigation?
Well, I think
situation.
I want to tell you, look, I am eager to hear his rationale. The president said he's going to do it. If you believe it's okay, or you believe it's some kind of a giant conspiracy, we all watched with our eyes people beating the crap out of law enforcement officers. So you better have a pretty good rationale. But I'm sitting back, and I want to wait to see what he says. And by the way, there's enormous amounts of evidence that are out there. So if he says they didn't do anything wrong, we can go look. Now, here's the thing that I will say, that if I were president. Don't hold your breath. If I were president, I would have certain standards in this. One thing would have to be someone accepts full responsibility for their crime, because that's part of what the process of redemption is supposed to be. You accept responsibility for your crime. If you're going to get pardoned, someone should say, I beg your pardon first.
Unless you actually truly believe that you did nothing wrong. But the one thing I'll say, just to kind of keep it in the spirit of at loggerheads here, is I'm not so sure President Biden was really the one organizing all those clemency cases and pardons and commutations and such, because not exactly sure he knows entirely what's going on.
All right, that's a nice now here we are at the end of the year. We're all showing mercy and kindness to everybody. Everyone's holding the doors of the subway for one another, and you've got to get your shot. Well, that's why I called Left versus Right. We'd be disappointing our audience if we didn't have at least one Joe Biden is old joke as part of this. Next, let's go to another controversy, this time on the other side. As all of our listeners know, Elon Musk is now not only a household name for making cars and rockets, but he's essentially kind of like a super friend of Donald Trump. And so when he says something about policy, everyone takes notice. And this week, he and Vivek Ramaswamy, his two folks that are on this commission to try to find government waste, forcefully came out in an argument for why we should not reduce immigration but expand immigration around H-1B visas, which is one of the visas that we have for highly skilled workers. It's used a lot in the tech industry, but it can be really anything. Normally, that would not be that controversial. Democrat and Republican have usually liked them. Joe Biden liked them. Donald Trump, when he got in, put a cap on them, said we want no more. But let me ask you this, as a representative of what's going on in the MAGA right, MAGA Central Station is bonkers over this. This great betrayal on the side of Elon Musk. You don't get what MAGA is all about when it comes to immigration. Break it down for me like I don't understand MAGA, because to be honest with you, James, I don't.
Well, I do think, Anthony, that there's some things you've noted in the past that potentially, depending on your perspective, are kind of rearing their head here. And you made reference to it. You said, okay, Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy, being businessmen, being entrepreneurs, being investors, whatever, they've got their own interests in terms of the private sector, how government interacts with that. And you suggested that there could be some conflict of interest with the whole Department of Government Efficiency thing. That's potentially sort of what's happening here, in the sense that Elon Musk comes out in defense of the H-1B1, says we need those highly skilled engineers to keep America going at the high level. Vivek Ramaswamy has a viral post where he kind of says, like, American culture stinks.
I didn't understand that one, but go ahead. Too many references to TV shows I never watched.
Yeah, right. Well, I'm here to give you the Boy Meets World references, so I got you covered on that. Corey is kind of a dweeb, so I think that's why he said that. But no, I think that there's often an attempt to have a really easy explanation behind a complicated issue. So the concept of immigration, American culture, do we have kids pushing enough towards STEM jobs, engineering, technology, mathematics, science? Maybe not. Maybe it's because of the way the system rewards kind of this indentured servitude type thing where you have H-1B students in college. They're studying various aspects of the private sector and getting jobs in that, and then they're hired at a lower level than what a Native American would be paid for that same
but
work.
you're marching around and dancing around the fundamental thing is that immigration is good for America, is what Musk is saying, and that Donald Trump has been demagoguing on immigration so long, half the country thinks it's bad. Yes, Vivek Ramaswamy and Elon Musk are right. We want the best and the brightest coming here. But you know what else we want? People to pick our almonds. You know what else we want? People going to that town in Ohio and working in a steel mill. Immigration is great for our economy. It's not lost on anyone. We've had this boom of undocumented people coming in. At the same time, our economy has been doing very well and the job market has been doing very well. Immigration is good for America. Now, Elon Musk says it as a guy from South Africa. Vivek Ramaswamy, whose family is from South Asia. It should be kind of obvious. What's funny to me, funny is not the word, what's ironic and interesting to me is that they seem to understand something that Donald Trump's supporters have been convinced is not true. That's why you're having this big fight, because immigration is good for America.
Well, I think that in reality, there is sort of a dividing line amongst the MAGA right, where there's some people kind of further out on the fringe, a little more extreme.
Racist.
I don't see it that way. I don't agree with that, where they are more or less anti any immigration. They think that there's too many people here chasing too few goods, not enough jobs, whatever their perspective may be. I don't co-sign that particular position. I'm fine with controlled immigration and legal immigration, and provided it fits within the framework. But I will say there's a difference between things being good for corporate America and good for the stock market, and what's good for the average rank and file American in regards to, let's say, the job market.
You mean people who want cheaper prices for food?
Pricing is one factor, but what about wages? What about employment?
You railed against inflation for 3 years now, and you're saying let's take out the workers that provide us our cheap food. I don't know. It doesn't sound very consistent with me. By the way, I just want to touch on something because you hemmed and hawed a little bit. There is an element of this MAGA anti-immigrant base, which is just clear racism, right?
Are there any element? So you're asking me if there's anyone out there who says they're
no? I'm saying it's a significant element of this anti-migrant, anti-immigrant thing. It's funny. I don't ever hear them talking about people from Sweden.
Let me ask you this: do you think the concept of wanting to defend American culture or suggesting that America is more than just economic opportunity is racist?
Yes.
Really?
Yes, because American culture, by definition, is cultures from other places. Unless you're a Native American, your culture is something that was brought from somewhere else. Your culture of Taco Bell was brought from somewhere else. Your culture of all kinds of things. The whole point of our country is that we don't have an American culture, I say with air quotes, because we are an amalgamation of people that come from other places. So yes, when people say American culture, they're talking about a racist thing.
That's an interesting perspective. I certainly don't share in it. I think we do have an American culture.
Let me ask you a question. What type of immigrant comes here that reflects non-American culture?
It's not that easy. In other words, you could identify almost anybody coming from any given country and say, they don't seem to have, let's say, 10 years later assimilated. And then you have other people 10 years later, maybe even a year later, who have assimilated.
I can't think of any generalization you can make about a group of migrants that haven't assimilated faster or slower than another group. By the way, it's the same exact thing. I don't know your background. You're the whitest guy I've ever met. Yeah. I don't know your background. It was Jews from Eastern Europe years ago. Mm-hmm. It's everyone comes in. We turn to the guy behind and say, "You dirty rascal, get out of my country." The whole point of it. But when people say, and I don't know if you read it this way, but you probably should. You should squint a little bit when you read Twitter and you see people talking about eating cats and dogs and you see the dirty rapists and you never see them talking about anyone from Ireland that way or anyone from England from that way or anyone from Italy that way. They're talking in a racist way. There's the whole idea, our culture, what that always means is people who don't look like me. And believe me, James, we are constantly bringing people to this country that don't look like me. They look like Elon Musk. They look like Vivek Ramaswamy. They look Dominican, look Venezuelan. They look Ukrainian. That's what makes America great.
Of course, there was a time when Italians and Irish were the subject of some of that sort of xenophobic response.
Everybody.
And pushback.
Who wasn't?
And the population that's coming from the more, let's say, developing nations is always going to be the one that's looked at as the outsider or, not quite up to snuff. But no, I think that American culture does exist and it's worth defending. People look at a post like Vivek Ramaswamy as sort of someone who says, oh, I'm so great because my family comes from India. And I think generally speaking, people resent that because it says, no, there's plenty of people that come here from various walks of life and succeed for any number of reasons. It's about hard work. It's about private property rights. And it's about educating people so that they can have the skills to succeed in the private
property rights in there, boy. No, listen, Barack Ramaswamy.
Private work. You have 8 hours a day to do what you want to do to make a living. That's private property.
That's all fine, but that has nothing to do with where you came from. And I think a lot of people who come from all kinds of listen. The bottom line
here in New York, it's like if you could show up and do the work, that's the new Amsterdam culture.
100%. I could not have said it better. That's what it is. If you can show up and do the work, and whether you're an H-1B visa or someone picking cotton or someone working at the neighborhood bodega or someone on a construction site, we should want that in our country, reward it.
But the nuance you're leaving out is that if you are coming from a nation that has a lower standard of living or that has lower earning potential, let's say, you may be willing to do the job for $80,000 when someone who has lived here their entire life is going to hold out for $100,000. So in essence, you're importing lower cost labor through a globalist principle.
We are not attracting for economic reasons from better performing countries. People don't leave their country travel 5,000 miles to take a worse economic life.
Nobody ever comes here from China? Don't they have a bigger economy than us these days?
They come here. People come here from all over the world to improve their lives, not to make them worse. Why do they travel 5,000 miles? Because Venezuela doesn't have an option. That's why if you go to Brighton Beach 10 years ago, you have architects and doctors driving cabs.
Right.
Because they're getting something in the United States they don't get elsewhere. But to say, I'm Vivek, I'm Musk, I want to shut down the government because someone is getting an agriculture price support, but I now care about H-1B visas because they're going to help me at Tesla is the ultimate phoniness.
Well, and I do think that's where somebody like Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy is potentially getting looked at sideways because it's like, you guys are such tech bros that you've benefited from the H1B1 or H1, now I'm making it the flu, the H1B program. And that means that you're not exactly a unbiased individual.
Right. And let me say this.
It could impact the whole Doge thing. We'll see.
And by the way, if we had immigration reform, which we've desperately needed for 25 years now and the Republicans have stopped, this is one of the things we can put in there. If you come here and you're a super skilled worker, Donald Trump himself said that if you graduate from any college, you get a green card. I'm all for that. I keep saying this over and over again. I talked about it on my show, The Middle, just now. I've said over and over again, doing a deal on immigration reform is not super hard. We kind of agree on the basic things. If we have a system, an orderly system for people to come in and do the work, for example, in the agriculture sector, those people we've locked in, not out. A lot of people want to come in for the seasonal picking and then go home. We know this because they're sending dollars home left and right. Let those people come and go. And if you're an employer, we've got to start to treat you like part of the problem because you know who you're hiring is undocumented.
I agree with you on that last point.
And if you're the government and you see a fake Social Security number come over the transom, sure, we collect their money for Social Security, but we also know that that's an undocumented person. Do we ever report those people? Of course we don't.
I think there's actually a law behind you can't report when someone steals a Social Security number.
To be honest with you, a fake Social Security number, they collect that money from the undocumented. You and I get it when we retire. They don't.
Will I be getting Social Security when I retire?
Well, that's another question. But if you do, it's because so many undocumented people are coming to it.
That's why. Okay.
Well, they've added billions and billions of dollars to the kitty, and they take nothing out. That's sheer profit for the Social Security system. But before we go to a break, I think in the year 2025, if Donald Trump is serious and wants to make a good faith effort to reform these laws, Democrats will be at the table. They always have, but it's Republicans that are usually ones that walk away because they yell amnesty, 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 and everything falls apart. Well, look, I'll give you the final word because we have to wrap up.
I would say that your brothers and sisters, your former colleagues in Congress, don't really want to come up with a solution to immigration because just like so many other things, it's a political football. It's something that they can campaign on and argue about and spend time on TV.
You seem to forget campaign 2024 already. It was you guys that were demagoguing on that. We were ducking as best we could. And we'll be right back.
Talk Radio 77 WABC. It's the left versus the right. In the right corner, it's James Flippin. In the left corner, it's Anthony Weiner. 77 WABC.
So welcome back to Left versus Right. Anthony Weiner on the left and James Flippin on your right. You miss any part of the program, you can get it as a podcast just about anywhere. James Flippin, who's been on the radio more than Curtis, it's always broadcasting Flippin this week.
Yeah, which is a rarity for sure.
Well, but you're doing great. The listeners are responding very well to you. You can also get your news cuts available, and I have a podcast called The Middle Unplugged. This week I talk about the 12 principles of a good campaign. I get a little spiritual this week.
Oh, nice.
So let's talk a little bit about how the coming year is going to look very different. We're going to have a new president getting sworn in on January 20th. But one date that's going to be very different than it was 4 years ago, January 6th, which is now one of those dates like 9/11, October 7th, and January 6th.
Day, you mean?
Yeah, I hardly believe that. It's going to look very different this year. No protests, no insurrections, no one bringing fake electors, no one saying hang Kamala Harris, assuming Donald Trump doesn't put out a tweet that day. So I think America is going to see a stark contrast between team constitution and team insurrection this January 6th. We saw team insurrection last time. Are you ready for team constitution?
Well, that's a very cute line. I like it. I would say that it has been kind of fascinating to see the extent to which there really hasn't been a lot of pushback or maybe like outspoken protest in response to President-elect Trump this time around. I don't think there's quite as much vitriolic response from the average American, maybe as much as there was, say, 8 years ago, even towards the end of Trump's term 4 years ago. I think that by and large, people are excited about what's going to come in 2025, a new look, a new attitude, a new focus, and by and large, I think people want to see what's going to happen here. So,
I think that's right. But here's what's different. What's different is when you have a head of a major party promoting lies about the election, encouraging people to come to Capitol Hill and march on the Capitol, to saying that something was stolen, people believe it. And now this year, you have a responsible party who is going to show you what we've always had in this country for the history of our country. We have had transitions of power peacefully until Donald Trump. So we're getting reminded again exactly what was involved 4 years ago, how unusual and how horrible that it was. Another reminder. Guarantee you this, you're going to see split screens on January 6th of what went on, and then on the other screen, it's going to be what happened 4 years ago. That's an important reminder for Americans. We should never forget that we almost had an election stolen, an insurrection was almost successful. We had people who were storming. They weren't for a handful of people doing the right thing. I'm not sure our constitutional government would have survived.
Okay. You've done with the ghost story now concerning. Anyway,
what did I say that wasn't factual? Bring it.
I'll just say this. It's interesting that you say that the response from, I guess, MAGA last time around was believing Trump's lies, and that's the reason why the events of January 6th happened.
Yes.
I have a different interpretation of it. I believe it was actually an operation conducted by the FBI, more or less, to
under
smear
Donald Trump
and delegitimize.
Under Donald Trump.
Well, we also know, given its track history, that the FBI operates
full of Democrats
with a different focus.
Full of Democrats.
Yes.
All those guys carrying guns and badges and crew cut haircuts. Yeah. And suddenly
career bureaucrats. Yeah, they tend to be.
Career bureaucrats. You call members of the NYPD career bureaucrats because they work for the city for 10 years?
Yeah, some of them are.
Okay.
You get into the white shirts, you get into the brass, and some of those are government guys.
So James Flippin.
We're not talking about cops walking the beat.
Let me just see if in this case, the FBI guys apparently were the guys walking the beat.
If they're in the office somewhere,
hey, I want to
arranging things, putting confidential informants out in the crowd.
Hey, can I tell you something? James, you've taken positions before. You're going to tell me that by and large, law enforcement guys are screaming liberal Democrats. Okay. I mean, anytime you want to have that conversation, I invite you to go out to any Islander game and ask around, see how many guys that are police officers, and ask them what they think about.
Want to donate to the DNC?
Yeah, exactly. Ask them what they think about Bill Clinton or Hillary Clinton or Anthony Weiner.
Yeah,
I was just out at UBS with Jordan to see the Islanders play a horrible game. They lost 7-1 to Buffalo, which was embarrassing.
Oh wow! And Buffalo snapped to like 13 games.
It was just horrible. Jordan wanted to leave after the second period. And the response I always get is the same. is you guys suck. But I'm glad to see you're an Islander fan, not a Ranger fan. But all right, if you're prepared to believe it. But let's go.
Can I just make one last
comment?
Of
course.
It's interesting that, like you say, the MAGA people believed what you referred to as Trump's lies. But I guess the American voters didn't believe the left's lies that democracy was going to die, that this would be the last possible election, that Trump's a dictator, that everything's going to go to pot if he gets elected.
I don't think too many people
and elected him.
I don't think too many people on the left voted for Donald Trump.
Okay, fine. So then the average American didn't believe those lies.
No, he didn't win 50%. What average are you talking about? He got 46%, 45%, and won by 1%. So no, most people in this country.
Splitting hairs, or
no, most people in this country. I just want to just make sure this is clear. An overwhelming majority in this country voted for either the Democrat or nobody. This guy didn't get any kind of mandate. The guy basically got a minority. If I told you the guy got 40% and 60% didn't, you wouldn't say the guy had a landslide. So most people still have that concern. However, we're going to wait and see. The one thing I know for sure, once he tries his insurrection again, you're going to do the same thing of trying to gaslight us like, what you see with your eyes didn't really happen.
I'm gaslighting now?
All you have to do, just turn on the video of January 6th and turn off the sound if you don't like the sound. Turn on Fox News and listening to every Republican congressman say how outrageous it is. Turn on Kevin McCarthy. Turn on all your Republican friends. Caroline Stefanik saying this qualifies him when she's giving interviews under her desk because an insurrection is coming to take over the place. So, but if you want to now say, oh, no, that didn't happen, don't believe your eyes, go look over there, knock yourself out, but the rest of us believe our eyes.
And I would just like to thank the listeners for taking that all in, as that is, of course, the fake news account of what happened on Patriots.
That's right, because you are not going to see Stefanik's tweets anymore because she took them down. However, the internet never forgets. But January 6th comes, but before that, January 3rd comes, and a lot of our listeners don't know this. I talked about it a little bit on my program just now, that when the new Congress is installed, you know what they don't have is a speaker. It starts out where basically the clerk of the House, the first thing that has to happen is a speaker is chosen, and then the speaker gavels in, and the rules of the House are set before they can do anything else. Now, our listeners, and frankly, all Americans know this process because 2 years ago, it went horribly wrong. If you remember, I think there were 15 different votes. The Republicans could not pull it off because they had such a narrow margin. Well, welcome to 2025. Speaker Johnson from the last is now not the speaker. I don't know how many people realize that. Right now, they after December 31st, where they have no speaker, he's going to try to get reelected. You thought 5 was a narrow margin. He has a 1-vote margin. If the Democrats don't vote for it, which they never do, he can't afford to lose much. What is your kind of prediction? Chaos again, which would be terrible for the Republicans, or chaos, and that's not so bad? Or do you think they'll figure out a way to all stick together?
Well, I have a hard time imagining them all, quote, sticking together, right? We talked about in this program how there are elements of the political right that are kind of fractured right now against something as one-off as an H-1B visa, or more overarching, the issue of immigration. And I do think that when you have as diverse a coalition of voters and interests and focuses, maybe in a big picture way, the middle class, within which what MAGA is, that diverse coalition, you're going to have a lot of different competing opinions. And some of that is like what the role of government is. I remember during the most recent attempts to fund the government, reading a lot of tweets from people saying, go ahead, shut the government down. What do I care? That type of thing. And I'm not really sure I fully understand what the mechanics will be. Like, for example, I'll ask you, if there is no speaker and it's that ongoing attempt, vote, revote, vote, politicking, behind the scenes, who's going to do this? We're going to negotiate this. And they can't elect a speaker. What happens? I mean, is the entire lawmaking process paralyzed?
The entire lawmaking process sits still. That's if you remember 2 years ago, the main difference from 2 years ago was we had a president, right? So one of the roles that the Congress has to play as soon as they get in is to do this House version of certifying the Electoral College votes and send them over. This is not usual. What we had last time was almost unprecedented, 15 votes. It used to be more...
Because it's such a margin, it's such a narrow margin.
Such a narrow margin, and also since the days of two parties, what happens, the parties get together, they choose their leaders, and then they march to the floor and they ratify it. But ever since the Tea Party movement in the Republican Party, where you had guys that said, I am not going to do anything at all, I want to shut down government, more or less. I mean, that's paraphrasing a little bit. I want to shut down government. John Boehner, they had a problem choosing. They got Hastert was in after another guy dropped out. They can't afford to lose too many votes. And when it comes down to a single person, the only reason we all learned the name Matt Gaetz is because he made himself famous 2 years ago, gumming up the works for everybody. And a lot of people are like, amen, brother, go ahead and do that. But the difference now is Donald Trump, every day that they're staring at a dysfunctional Congress is a bad day for Donald Trump. This is going to be his window to be like, there's a new sheriff in town. We're going to be able to run things. We're going to be able to get things passed. I think they pull it together. I think that Donald Trump is a powerful enough magnetic force that they're able to get Johnson elected. But it does speak to how hard it's going to be to get anything done. Remember, Donald Trump wants to do a giant tax cut that's going to balloon the deficit. He has already said that he disagrees with some of the programs that a lot of Republicans like. He's threatened to give them primaries, and they still voted against him. You've got people like Vivek Ramaswamy and Elon Musk that don't know their butts from their elbows. A lot of members of Congress are going to say, you're not taking my local program, and they only have one vote to spare. So unless he makes a coalition with Democrats, which might surprise us from time to time, I said it about immigration, I think it's going to be a fairly chaotic couple of years here for the president.
Yeah, it could be interesting to watch and see if, in fact, this sort of maybe new Trump, if in fact he is one, after the assassination attempt and the lawfare and the whole thing, maybe there is some contrition and ability to kind of make a deal, the art of the deal and all that kind of stuff. I could see that. But I will just note, I'd like to just say that cutting taxes actually increases government tax receipts. Let's not forget that.
I'm sorry. The government debt, 1/4 of all our government debt for 160 years is one administration. I mean, so you can, yes, there's two sides to every family budget. How much you bring in and how much you spend. If you go quit your job and get out your credit card for everything.
Well, I think we would agree that we need to massively cut government spending.
Well, if you want to go ahead, you and Vivek can sit down and try to figure out
Take
where.
a red pen, baby.
Yeah. Haircut. Do your best. Yeah, I know what you want. You want them to defund NPR so we have less competition.
Yes, exactly. And that's the only reason why.
So mass deportation. We've heard this all talked about. You and I had an argument last week. You were wrong. I was right. Not the first time. Where I said, no, mass deportation. He means everything. I said, no, just criminals. Well, Anthony Weiner, maybe for the first time, got it right. This week, we've seen this guy Honan, the new budget czar, the new border czar. By the way, it's ironic. We use the word czar as it's totally appropriate.
I'm not a huge fan.
We're anti-rush on everything, but if it helps us do intros on a show like this, then it's worth it. But he says he wants to do some things. One, a very expensive program to build more prison cells because. Remember, if you're going to deport someone, you have to have hearings. You got to hold them somewhere. Secondly, he's now said, well, we've got this big problem that you can't deport kids, especially if they were born here. They're citizens, so how do you deal? What if you have one guy you want to deport, but a mom that's here legally and a daughter that is? How do you handle it? Well, he came up with the idea on Thursday. Well, we might need halfway houses. No one knows what the heck he means by that. We're starting to see rubber hit the road on what this mass deportation means. Do you like what you're seeing, or are you getting a little anxious that maybe we're not ready for this?
No, I wouldn't say I'm anxious. I mean, I think that the dollars involved make it interesting because you do figure that there's going to have to be funding put into place by Congress. We already talked about the difficulties that's going to be associated with just picking a speaker and the one vote margin. I can't really imagine what the compromise would be that would allow the Republicans to get enough votes, let's say, in terms of enacting the money for that mass deportation. But no, I think Tom Homan made the point back when he was in the Trump administration. I think it was the first time around.
He was also in the Obama administration.
Okay, so there you go. He said, look, you can deport entire families. In essence, that's the solution behind child separation, both President Obama, President Trump had a PR mess on their hands with this whole, separating parents from kids and all this kind of thing. So he suggested that's what you do, is you deport the entire family. Now, I don't know if that's what that halfway house kind of refers to. In essence, if you're an adult, that maybe you're being accused of having violated this immigration statute, and that's why you're going to get deported. The kid, not exactly the same status, but you can't just have them unattended and unguarded. So I do think that there has to be some creative processes applied here, but I don't know. I wouldn't say I'm getting nervous. I'm just kind of curious as to how it's all going to play out.
Well, the creative process is your judge has to decide. And if you go before a judge, which, by the way, were underfunded under Trump last time, and you say these people should be deported, you've got to persuade a judge to do it, and I doubt very much that they're going to deport the children. So then you got to figure out what you're going to do. This is the problem with a lot of this. This blunt object, this thing that fit on posters at the Republican convention, mass deportation. When you really start to have to do policies and run government, that's the rubber hits the road. And I tell you what's going to happen. The moment they start deporting someone from an agriculture area and you start to decapitate the agriculture business like we talked about earlier, people are going to say, well, we want mass, but not those people. And we'll be right back.
Talk Radio 77 WABC. It's the left versus the right. From Studio 77, it's a 77 WABC debate. 77 WABC.
So welcome back to Left versus Right. Anthony Weiner on your left, James Flippin on your right. I want to say this. We're going to have a chance to say it at the end. I want to thank you, James, but also all of our listeners. The show's doing very well. Every time we change hosts, we're like, oh, boy, we have a lot big shoes to fill, and you did, but you're doing an excellent job, and I want to thank you. I have been getting a lot of mail about me talking too fast and also me not letting you talk enough. So do you have anything you'd like to say? Okay, so let's move to our next subject.
Just as far as if you talk too fast, I would say, welcome to a New Yorker.
Yeah, welcome to, exactly. You can always, I did find out, I mentioned this to my son Jordan, and he says, Dad, look at this on the app. You can actually slow down the speed. So he slowed me down. I sound like a Midwesterner if you slow me down enough. So in one of these issues that would be funny if it were not maybe serious, Donald Trump set his sights this week. All right, it sounds crazy, but bear with me. He wants to buy/invade Greenland, and he wants to take back the Panama Canal. I don't even know which to start with. Let's go with Greenland.
Why don't you explain to me how he plans to invade Greenland?
Well, how is he gets a sovereign country that's under the protectorate of, I guess, Finland? It's like 60...
I think, isn't it Denmark? Or?
It might be Denmark.
Okay,
all these white people countries all look the same to me. But it's 60,000 some odd people. It's like nothing. I think that's literally the number. It's rich in some elements that we use in cell phones and electric cars and these other things. They have some assets, but that's true of a lot of countries. And if we were to acquire it to return to the colonial age and add it to Grenada and St. Croix and these other places we have weird connections to, it would be like increasing the mass of the United States by a third. It seems preposterous. Maybe it's not preposterous. What do you think? Like when you, small government, James Flippin hears this, does he say, listen, I love my cult leader, but this is Meshuggah?
Well, I think that you also left out the 51st state, Canada. What about that?
Oh, that's a good one. Another one. Let's knock them all off. Yeah. We don't have a lot of time because we want to get to our Peoples of the Year, but go ahead.
Okay, so first of all, I think that it was brilliant what Trump more or less said to Trudeau. I'm changing the subject slightly.
You're doing Canada.
Off
Gotcha.
Greenland
Okay.
and Panama, and I'll get there. But as far as the whole Canada thing, it's like, look, if you guys can't make it work without these big with tariffs and in other words being enacted on you, then maybe you should join the fray. Maybe you should join the team. Maybe you need to join the United States to better function within this North American structure. Greenland, really more accurately part of, let's say, North America than Europe. And hey, with all this climate change, right, with all this global warming, we're looking at a nice little deep sea port there in Greenland, right? Am I right about that?
I don't know where to even start. First of all, The tariff deal that we have with Canada was set by Donald Trump. I don't know what he's complaining about. He didn't like the deal that he did. He wants another deal. And taking
we wanted better border security. So he said, okay, we're going to act another 10% tariff. And they said,
Canada's a border security? I thought they didn't like us competing against their timber or something like that. But but that wasn't serious. The Greenland thing, he sounds like he's serious. What? I don't even understand.
President Truman tried to buy it once upon a time.
Yes, that was in the 1940s. I'm not sure we're now a colonialist power that goes around trying to. Yes, do we have the military might to go do it, Mr. America first? I want to have Greenland. But by the way, Democratic members of Congress, they're very progressive there. But what do you think he means? Do you think he means pay money to buy it?
Yeah, in essence, I think that he's looking at it as an opportunity to say to Denmark, here's a cash payment, and then taking on as more or less a protectorate.
And then what do we do?
Hopefully benefit financially from having Greenland.
Those people become American?
Well, I'm not entirely sure because you mentioned some of the other Grenada and St. Croix and you've got
the Virgin Islands. You
Guam,
have a representative in Congress if you're the Virgin Islands, but okay, but it's not serious. Do you agree?
Probably not. I mean,
he's not a serious man, your president, is he?
Well, I disagree with you on that, but I do think that he sometimes likes to throw chum in the water. Let's say, and sort of get a response from people. He knows that staying at the front end of the news cycle is something he's very, very good at, and he constantly does it.
He's the president-elect. He doesn't need to stay at the front of the news cycle by making preposterous suggestions.
Believe it or not, everybody falls out of the news cycle except for him.
Yeah,
and it's amazing
I guess that's right.
Happens.
I mean, you know what it's about? It's about content for left versus right. That's all he thinks about most of the day.
Probably true.
All right, let's do Panama. Panama's a little bit different.
Yeah.
He's a little bit he's concerned because there are some Chinese companies, not China, Chinese companies that operate in Panama, but there are countries, everyone who imports or exports has a presence in Panama. He's like, give us back or charge us less to use the Panama Canal. Go ahead.
Well, I think that there probably should have been better protections baked into the deal when we handed control of the canal over to Panama. It was sort of a graduated process. And at this point, potentially through some things that are a little more fair, like the water levels are really low in Panama right now due to a dry season. And
look at you knowing the weather in Panama. I haven't heard you do one of those news cuts with the weather today in Panama.
Yeah, well, no, that doesn't usually make it in. But apparently that's causing the canal authority to have to charge higher fees and that kind of stuff. Yeah. But there is also a concern that with how much of the container ships go through there and with the cost of shipping always on the rise, and of course inflation a big problem right now, that China in the ongoing sort of trade war may be cozying up to Panama in a way to get a better position. I don't think there's anything wrong with Trump more or less saying, look, we built the thing, you owe us, we should be getting a better benefit. Here's the time to make that happen. We built the thing
in your country and gave it back to you in the Carter administration, and you don't like the fees. Let's let the companies negotiate those fees.
The shipping companies, you're saying.
Yeah, that's the same thing the Chinese are doing. China's not down there as a country. It's Chinese, Hong Kong-based companies. Let them negotiate their own fees. Mr. Small Government, you want your president negotiating shipping fees for people? I mean,
when it comes to the international aspect of things, right, like I think I've talked about my difficulty with or objections to aspects of H-1B, and you also talk about stuff like tariffs and trade and the way that I want to see Americans benefit from that, not necessarily corporations or foreign countries.
But you want big government putting a finger on the scale to make sure that happens. It's a very interesting form of libertarianism.
Every now and then, I do think the government should be carrying a big stick.
Yes. This is it's difficult being a libertarian because the modern day Republican Party is sometimes anything but libertarian in a lot of its views.
I think that's fair.
All right. Well, let's go to the part of the show everyone has been waiting for. We've heard people at this time of year giving awards, the best of this, doing predictions. Here's what we've decided to do. We've decided that Anthony and James should decide for ourselves and with the consensus of our listeners who was the true Person of the Year. Time Magazine, yes, it still exists, made Donald Trump the Man of the Year. I think last year, was it Taylor Swift last year?
That sounds right.
I remember the picture of her with the cat on her shoulder.
Oh, yeah.
I think Taylor Swift was before that, and beyond that, I have no idea. So why don't you get us started? Who was your Person of the Year?
Okay, so my Person of the Year, it is a highly local connection, but I think it's really important because of what we've seen in terms of the rise of crime, violent crime, things that have happened since COVID-19. And here in New York City, a lot of that's unfortunately happening within the subway. So my selection for Man of the Year, Daniel Penny, the guy who stepped up when so many others wouldn't because they're deep in their phone or worried about what people are going to say or obviously potentially being brought up on charges. So the fact that he was acquitted and more or less said to the nation at large, it is okay to jump in when you think people are in danger, that to me makes him the Man of the Year.
That's an excellent choice. Now, I just want to say for our listeners, and Ricky can attest to this, we didn't coordinate with each other on who would be the Man of the Year.
I wasn't sure if we were going to discuss it ahead of time or not, but we decided
not to. I have a very similar one. I think the persons of the year this year are the jurors of Manhattan because they had two very high-profile cases, one against the President of the United States and one against Daniel Penny. And the right was furious at the idea that a jury in Manhattan could ever come up with a sane decision and rip the jury system. And then in the Daniel Penny case, there are a lot of people scratching their heads. How can anyone watch that video as many times as they did and still think that Daniel Penny didn't kill that man? And yet these regular people whose names we will never know is part of a system that is, it's not talk show hosts, it's not editorial writers, it's not politicians, just regular schmoes. And you know what? They do it. They pulled it off. No one's completely satisfied, like no one is. But I got to tell you something. Watching both of those juries function, you can criticize the prosecutors for bringing cases, and that's a conversation for a different time, and you and I have some common ground about that because I think prosecutors do political things. They're human beings. But these juries who come from all different walks of life, they respond to that flyer. They don't try to get out of it. They sit in those cold rooms and those dark chairs. They listen to the instructions. And if it were not for them, we would have a very different world. And I really do appreciate them. Now, the whole idea of Manhattan jurors can't get anything right. Maybe they got both cases wrong. But I have said consistently about these cases, I trust the juries to do what they can. And I try not to second guess juries. I try not to take what I read in the newspaper and think I'm a better. And you know what? I would like to think if I ever got called as a juror, and I'm not going to be because they just vetoed the bill that says that felons can serve on juries, I like to think that I'd be like that too. I can hear the facts and still work it out. So that's my selection.
You know what, Anthony? I'll say this. I think that it's really both interesting and commendable that you having experience what you've experienced would take that stance on it because it is it's so important to the society within which we live, this jury of your peers. And I feel like the majority of people really take it seriously, right? Like nobody wants to get called. Anytime you get that letter in the mail, it's like, oh man. And then you talk to your employer. It's like, I might have to go. I might have to miss it. I remember one summer when my father was a member of the grand jury and it was really,
that's a long time.
Long, and you go like one day a week and he worked on commission. So it was always like a real challenge to have to miss work like that. But it's something that we as Americans take very seriously. I think you're right. We don't always agree with the outcome. And I do think that there's definitely problems with the fact that the officers of the court or the prosecutor responds to voters like the Manhattan District Attorney as opposed to just kind of hopefully doing what they think is right or whatever. And that can sometimes get sticky with that. But yeah, you're right. It makes an interesting argument that is sort of the man of the year.
Here's the thing and
in the Time Magazine rules, we can do that, right? Yeah, sometimes they say the media of the whatever.
Yeah, the thing of the year.
Yeah.
Here's the thing about the Daniel Penny case, and I'm going to try to tie it together to the jury, our two selections for the people of the year, is that we have this tendency sometimes in America, particularly in the media we do this, to assume we're smart and everyone else is an idiot. Or we're virtuous and everyone else is bad. When in fact, we're all just regular people making decisions and trying to do what we think is right in the moment. And very often when someone does something that we don't like, maybe rather than assuming they're being venal or they're a murderer, is they're doing what they think is right. And maybe a jury is the perfect embodiment of that. We trust ourselves to go out and clean the gutters of our house, why would we think that some other guy's too much of an idiot to do them themselves and need to be protected with a law? Or we believe that if we were in a jury box, we would be smart enough. Why do we assume just because someone's anonymous, we assume they're not? And I tell you, as a politician, I would say this to my colleagues all the time when they say, I want a mandatory this or a mandatory that. We pay judges. Let them have some discretion whether someone's too dangerous to be let out on bail. If you trust juries or you trust voters to vote for politicians, why can't we trust them to come up with a sentence rather than a mandatory minimum that we decide sitting here in Washington? So I think that there is kind of a common thread between those two choices.
That being said, I think I'd like to nominate as potentially the worst person of the year, Judge Juan Merchan.
Well, Judge Juan Merchan, you've got to wait till 2025
all right, okay.
Or maybe 2029 because that'll be the year he will be sentencing.
That's
maybe.
Right. Wow, you got that to look forward to.
I'm all ready. But until then, between now and then, I can call him President Convicted Felon Donald Trump. So thank you to the jury for all of that. Well, we only have a couple more minutes. I have a couple of thank yous I want to make. Eric Salas, who every week, Ricky Fernandez. That's right, Ricky. Is that get your last name right? Ricky Fernandez. Stephanie, who does a great job with our social media. Will, who sometimes pitches in. The staff around here is really great, and I want to thank you, John and Margot Katsimatidis, for giving us an opportunity to do this. And if you have any thanks, all the different amazing things about me, you got a minute to do that.
And I couldn't possibly get in all the amazing things about you in just 1 minute, so I'll just say yes. And then also just, throwing it out there that Chad Lopez, was a guy who said, hey, I'd really like to see you and Anthony mix it up. And I said, that'd be fun. That'd be interesting. I'd definitely be open to that. And I enjoyed the aspects of the show with Curtis, when Roger Stone popped on, obviously Dominic, the really heated back and forth, the haymakers, but our sophisticated dance
let's not get carried away. Let's not get carried away. Sophisticated is a high bar for us. I will point out one other thing. If you want another show like this, two competing views on the issues of the day, you can't find it in New York City.
Yeah.
And increasingly, you can find it in the country.
So true.
On Fox News, they have 4 conservatives and 1 liberal. On CNN, 4 liberals and 1 conservative. If you really do want something like this, the only place you can get is 77 WABC News Radio. And I'm grateful that they give us the opportunity. They never say what subjects we have to cover. They never beef at us about what we say unless I curse too much.
Right.
So to all of our listeners who have responded to it, I'm glad they have.
Yeah. No, and I watch old clips sometimes of some of these like town hall style meetings back in the 70s where college kids would come and ask questions and stuff like that. It was so much more civil.
Yeah, totally.
Focused on like actually allowing people to say different things. I don't know. That's a good thing.
That's before the Republicans became all jerks.
That's the reason.
And on behalf of all of us here, have a happy and a sweet new year. May nothing but blessings for you and your family.
Eden Memorial Chapels understands Jewish funerals can take many forms. Some are Orthodox, while others are more conservative or of a Reformed nature. There's no one better. With services close to all New York and New Jersey cemeteries, Eden Memorial Chapels offer fair and balanced pricing and can provide easy transfer of you and your loved ones to Israel. While you're grieving, they're here to take care of all the details so that you deal with less bureaucracy and have more peace of mind. Go to EdenMemorial.com. That's EdenMemorial.com.